Yesterday morning, my daughter called me. "Dad, the picnic's off. Everyone's too busy." That evening, I walked past the park and froze. There they were, my daughter, her husband, the whole family, laughing, eating, using my late wife's picnic blanket as if I never existed. I stood in the shadows, heart sinking. For years I stayed silent, telling myself dignity meant enduring. But that night I realized silence can also be a blade, one I was ready to use. They thought they left me behind. What they didn't know was that I had proof locked away, and a plan they would never see coming. What happened when I finally spoke cut deeper than any lie they told. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice still reaches. The call came just after breakfast, the sun pouring through the kitchen window in that soft, golden way it only does on early summer mornings. Darlene's voice was casual, almost too casual, as if she was reading from a note she had rehearsed. "Dad, the picnic's off. Everyone's busy. We'll do it another time." A small pause hung between her words and my silence. My first instinct was to ask who exactly was busy, or why it had to be canceled altogether, but I swallowed the questions. No sense in sounding needy. "All right, sweetheart," I said, steady as a stone. "Another time, then." The line clicked, leaving me alone with the gentle hum of the refrigerator. The apple pie dish sat clean on the counter, waiting. For a moment, the kitchen felt colder than it should have in June. I tried to brush it off. Families get busy. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Still, there was something in her tone that settled in my chest, like a draft sneaking under the door. I pushed it aside the way I've done with many things since my wife passed. Fold it neatly, tuck it away where no one can see. After all, today was supposed to be the picnic, so I stuck to the ritual. I shaved slowly, making sure the old razor lines were clean, slipped on my best pressed shirt, the one my wife used to say brought out the color in my eyes, pulled out the pie crust recipe she left behind in her handwriting, faded, but still legible, mixing the apples with cinnamon. I felt her presence hovering in the room, just as it always does when I cook that pie. The house filled with the smell, sweet and warm, a smell that once meant laughter on the porch, children racing across the lawn, Darlene squealing when her cousins chased her, the smell of a family whole, pie cooling on the counter. I sat on the porch, rocking slowly, the wood creaking beneath me. The cicadas had started their song, and I found myself lost in summers long gone. My wife's laughter carried on the breeze in memory. Darlene is a little girl with freckles across her nose, running barefoot through the grass. My chest tightened with a tenderness that was half love, half sorrow. But the hours passed. The road stayed quiet. No car doors slammed. No children's voices echoed up the drive. Just the cicadas, and the ticking of the old clock inside. Afternoon stretched long, the shadows changing shape. I finally carried myself back into the kitchen. The pie sat untouched. I cut no slice. The silence pressed in heavy. But I wore it like armor. I've learned silence can hold more dignity than words. At the sink, I washed my hands. Water cool against my skin. My eyes fell on the corner of the kitchen where the picnic blanket lay folded, still waiting. Darlene had left it here weeks ago. If the picnic was truly canceled, why hadn't she taken it? I dried my hands slowly, staring at that blanket. Something wasn't right. That blanket. I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. The next morning, the quiet of the house weighed heavier than usual. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor, catching the untouched pie on the counter. It felt like it belonged to another time, a happier one. A trip to the grocery store seemed the only excuse to leave behind the silence, even if just for an hour. At the store, the automatic doors slid open and the cool air greeted me. I pushed a cart slowly down the aisles, pretending to study the shelves. My mind wasn't on the shopping list. It kept circling back to that blanket in the corner of my living room. Then, near the apples, I saw her, Darlene. She froze when our eyes met. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Something that wasn't just surprise. She looked past me, then down at the fruit, fumbling with a plastic bag. "Dad," she said softly, too softly, like her voice didn't want to be heard. "I'm just picking up a few things. Been busy." Her hands shook as she pulled at the roll of bags. Busy. That word again. I nodded, as if it explained everything, though it explained nothing. I wanted to ask about yesterday, to ask why the blanket was still at my house if the picnic was never meant to be, but her eyes avoided mine, sliding away as though the floor tiles had answers she couldn't find in me. Before I could speak again, Curtis appeared. He walked up behind her, hand on her shoulder like a stamp of ownership. His smile was practiced, polite, thin, without warmth. "Marlin," he said evenly, nodding once. "Good to see you." The words were friendly enough, but the air between us said otherwise. He gave Darlene's shoulder a little squeeze, like a signal, and turned her cart toward the next aisle. She followed him without another word, without another look back. I stood in place for a long moment, holding a bag of apples I hadn't planned to buy. People passed around me, carts squeaking, children begging for candy, and yet it all felt hushed, as though my world had shrunk down to that single exchange, outside, with groceries tucked into my trunk. I lingered. Sylvia Trent from next door crossed the parking lot, her face bright as ever. She lifted a hand. "Morning, Marlin." The words landed like stones. I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. "Is that so?" I managed. She nodded, oblivious, and carried on toward her car. I stood still, keys in hand, pulse quickening. The drive home blurred past. Once inside, I set the groceries on the counter. Their weight nothing compared to what pressed down on me. The pie was still there, covered but untouched, a silent witness to yesterday's lie. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. Every glance toward that folded blanket in the corner seemed sharper now. Sylvia's words echoed in my head. "Loading coolers." I whispered the question aloud, the sound of it hollow in the empty kitchen. So if the picnic was off, where did they all go? The silence answered me back. The morning after the grocery store meeting still weighed heavy. Sylvia's words about coolers being loaded into Darlene's car echoed again and again, but nothing prepared me for what came next. From the porch, the hum of neighborhood life floated across the quiet street. That's when a small, clear voice broke the silence. Elsie's. Her little shoes scuffed along the sidewalk as she walked hand in hand with her mother and Curtis. "Grandpa, we forgot the picnic blanket yesterday," she chirped, waving at me with all the innocence only a child could carry. Time seemed to stop. Darlene's hand clamped quickly over Elsie's mouth, her eyes sharp and hurried. "Hush, Elsie," she muttered, forcing a strained smile in my direction. The damage was already done. The words lingered like an open wound. Forgotten picnic blanket. Yesterday. So the picnic hadn't been canceled. It had happened. Just without me. A smile was pulled onto my face, though it felt more like a mask than anything genuine. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I called back gently, my voice steady even as something inside cracked. Darlene tugged Elsie away, Curtis keeping his eyes fixed ahead, unwilling to meet mine. Inside, though, betrayal set in deep, the careful shave, the pressed shirt, the pie cooling on the counter, all of it collided into one hollow truth. They had been together, and I had been left alone. I sat there long after they disappeared down the street, fingers tracing the grain of the old porch railing. My wife and I had once painted it together, laughing as Darlene played tag on the lawn. How had those summers turned into this silence, this deliberate exclusion? That afternoon, a faint sound tugged at my ears. Laughter. Familiar voices rising from the park just a few blocks away. Against better judgment. The cane tapped a slow rhythm on the sidewalk as my feet carried me forward. Each step was heavy, as if the truth grew heavier the closer I came. The park was alive with noise, children squealing, coolers cracking open, the lazy strum of a guitar somewhere under the shade. And then I saw them, from behind the cover of tall trees, The picture unfolded. Darlene, Curtis, relatives I hadn't seen in months, all gathered around picnic tables, plates piled with food, soda cans hissing open, conversations overlapping in warmth and cheer. Their circle was complete, and I was not part of it. There and in the middle sat Elsie, giggling with her cousins, chasing after a balloon as Curtis grilled hot dogs. My chair was nowhere. My name was nowhere. My place had been erased as neatly as crossing out a line on paper. The sound of their laughter stung sharper than words. It wasn't the food or the gathering, it was the deliberate removal, the choice to enjoy family without the man who had held them all together once. I stepped back into the shade, heart pounding against ribs that felt too tight. My hand brushed the fabric of the picnic blanket I had carried, folded neatly under my arm like some kind of talisman. It had been mine and my wife's, our summers stitched into it, our love woven through its threads. Looking at them from that distance, a whisper escaped before I even realized it. So this is what family looks like, without me. The words tasted bitter, but they hardened something inside. Betrayal no longer felt soft. It was sharpening, becoming resolve. From the shelter of the trees, the sight cut deep. Darlene had spread out the old checkered picnic blanket. Not just any blanket, but the one my wife used to keep folded neatly in the linen closet, only brought out for family gatherings. That blanket carried years of sunshine, spilled lemonade, children's naps under shade trees, and my wife's laughter. Now it lay in the grass, flattened by others' feet, stretched wide as if it had forgotten who once guarded it. To see it there, beneath their plates and drinks, without me, it felt like they had stolen not just fabric, but memory itself. The ache sharpened when my eyes traced the ring of folding chairs. Among the circle, one seat stood conspicuously empty. It wasn't at the center, but slightly to the side, positioned just where I might have sat if I'd been invited. Was it an oversight, or worse? Was it placed there as a cruel echo, a reminder that my absence was intentional? The emptiness of that chair screamed louder than all their laughter. Curtis stood tall near the grill, knife in hand, carving meat with an easy pride. He spoke with that booming laugh of his, the one that made people lean in as though he carried all the authority in the world. Sylvia chuckled at his jokes, nodding, sipping from her cup as if she had no stake in the truth. Relatives clapped him on the back, children squealed in play, and in the middle of it all, Elsie ran free, chasing bubbles without realizing her grandfather stood just beyond the tree line, erased from their day. It wasn't just exclusion anymore. It was erasure. They had my wife's blanket. They had my family's gathering. They had the chair where I should have sat. The things that had always been symbols of belonging were stripped of me, left hollow, repurposed for a family gathering where I was not wanted. Watching them cheer and laugh over those symbols felt like being replaced in spirit, not only in body. Turning away should have been easy. Yet the feet lingered in the dirt, refusing to step fully back. Anger, quiet but burning, began to settle in where sadness had been. They wanted what belonged to me, my wife's touch, my traditions, my place, but not me. They couldn't erase my memories, but they were trying to live them without my presence. That sting lodged deep, heavier than anything I'd carried before. At last, my lips moved before I could stop them. A whisper, just for myself. They've taken everything that meant family, and left me the silence. The whisper hardened, almost like a vow. Because silence, I realized, wouldn't last forever. Walking home from the park, the blanket pressed under one arm. The weight of it felt heavier than cloth ever should. Every step echoed against the sidewalk, cane tapping lightly, but inside there was nothing light about it. The laughter that had carried from the park still rang in my ears, lingering like a taunt. By the time the front door closed behind me, the silence in the house felt like a punishment. The living room greeted me with the same stillness it always did. No voices, no smells of supper, no low hum of the television my wife used to leave on in the evenings. Just silence, deep and hollow. I unfolded the blanket and placed it carefully across the armchair where my wife once sat. The chair I never let anyone else touch. The sight of it there struck me harder than I expected. Hers was the last hand that folded it before it was taken. Grief curled into anger, the two indistinguishable now. The knock on the door startled me. Evening light was fading outside, a quiet hour no one usually came. When I opened it, there stood Darlene, my daughter, holding a plate covered with foil. She smiled, a practiced smile. "Brought you some leftovers. Dad didn't want you to feel left out," she said, her tone too sweet, like honey masking vinegar. Left out. The words scraped. She had been the one to call, the one who told me it was cancelled, the one who left me sitting alone while they feasted without me, and now she wanted to hand me scraps, as if kindness could be measured in cold chicken and a spoonful of potato salad. I stepped aside to let her in. She set the plate down on the table with a clatter. My eyes followed her hands, watching the way they fussed over the foil, pretending this was normal. "You told me it was cancelled," I said, voice low but steady. "I sat here waiting like a fool. And all the while you were out there, laughing." She froze, her back stiff. For a moment, her mouth opened like she might apologize. But instead she said, "It wasn't my idea. Curtis thought, it'd be better this way. You've been tired. Dad, we didn't want you straining yourself." The words burned worse than the lie. To shift it onto her husband, to soften it as if they had been protecting me. "You think I don't know what it means to be shut out of my own family?" The words rose without my permission, years of patience snapping all at once. At that moment, Curtis appeared in the doorway behind her, hands in his pockets, leaning as if the house belonged to him. A smugness rested on his face that made my knuckles tighten around the cane. "We thought it best you rest," he said smoothly. "You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. Too much noise. Too much running around. It was for the kids. For the kids." As if I wasn't a grandfather who had rocked those children to sleep, walked them to the school bus, taught them to bait hooks at the lake. His voice twisted my exclusion into charity, painting me as fragile, as unnecessary. Something inside me snapped. The plate of food still sat untouched on the table, her offering of scraps. With one motion, I slammed it down harder, the dishes rattling under the foil. "Don't feed me scraps of family," I growled, every word tasting of steel. "Either you want me there, or you don't." The room fell silent. Darlene's eyes flickered, but no words came. She stood frozen, Curtis at her side, both of them wrapped in silence thicker than any excuse. It was in that silence that I heard the truth, the kind of truth words couldn't hide. The house was too quiet that night. After the door shut behind Darlene and Curtis, there was no rest waiting for me. Every tick of the clock seemed louder than the last. And sleep never came. Their words replayed in the silence, Curtis's smug tone, Darlene's empty face. "We thought it best you rest." Those words gnawed at me like termites on wood. I sat at the desk in my little office, where the smell of old paper and furniture polish always carried traces of my late wife. Her touch lingered in the way she had kept records, neat and labeled, a legacy of order. Tonight, that order felt like my last grip on sanity. Something in my gut told me the picnic was only the surface, a distraction covering something deeper. I opened the drawer, pulling out folders one by one, deeds, bank statements, insurance papers. I laid them out in careful rows, like cards in a game I could not afford to lose. Hours passed, my cane leaning against the desk while my eyes scanned signatures and dates. And then, one paper stopped me cold. It was the deed to the lake cabin, the place where we once took Darlene as a girl to fish off the dock and roast marshmallows by the fire. The deed looked familiar, but my name, my own name, seemed strange. Letters curved wrong, lines too neat. The more I stared, the less it felt like mine. I pulled out the older copy from the folder, one my wife had filed away years back. Side by side, the difference was undeniable. One bore my shaky but authentic hand, the other, smooth, practiced, wrong. The truth crashed over me in a wave of ice. Someone had forged my signature. My hand trembled, not from age but from fury. Exclusion from a picnic was one thing. Stealing the legacy I built was another. Curtis. His smugness suddenly made sense. The way he carried himself as if the house already belonged to him. Darlene's silence. Her quickness to shift blame. They were moving beyond shutting me out of a meal. They were stripping me of control. I couldn't face this alone. I picked up the phone, the cord twisting in my hand as I dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Harlan," I said when the familiar gravelly voice answered. "I need your eyes on some papers." Harlan Dorsey, my old friend, once a notary and a man who never missed a detail. Within an hour, he was sitting across from me, glasses low on his nose, the lamplight pooling across the desk. He studied both copies, his finger tapping the page. "This isn't yours, Marlin," he said finally. "It's a forgery, no question." The words settled into my chest with a finality that burned. There it was. Not suspicion, not paranoia, but proof. My grief gave way to a new edge, one I hadn't felt in years. Quiet fury. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of old wood filling the space between us. "They think I'm weak, Harlan. They think silence means surrender." He gave me a look, steady and firm. "Then don't stay silent." But silence, I realized, could be its own weapon. My anger sharpened into resolve. Confronting them tonight would gain me nothing but denials. No, I would wait. Watch. Gather proof. Timing was everything. As dawn broke pale against the blinds, I placed the forged deed back in a folder and locked it inside the desk drawer. My hand rested on the key a moment longer than necessary. "If they want war," I whispered into the quiet morning. "They just started one." The word about the gathering came not from my daughter, but from Sylvia Trent. She dropped it casually, almost like she regretted saying anything, then quickly looked away. It wasn't an invitation, but a father doesn't need an invitation to see his own family. That was what I told myself while I put on a clean shirt and brushed my hair back. The walk to their house felt longer than it used to, though I knew every crack in the sidewalk. My cane tapped in rhythm, steady, a sound to remind me I still stood on my own 2 feet. When their house came into view, laughter spilled out through the windows. It carried that careless, bright tone of people who believe the world inside belongs only to them. Before stepping out, I hesitated in front of my old laptop at home. That morning, I had seen Darlene's post, a smiling group photo captioned, "Family all together." The picture showed a table loaded with food, Curtis's hand raised mid-toast, and Elsie in the corner with her cousins. My heart sank at the words, "all together," because all did not include me. That post wasn't just a family moment. It was a message to the world that I was already erased. By the time I arrived, the driveway was full. Cars lined the street, the kind of scene neighbors glance at and smile, thinking, "What a close family." I paused at the end of the walk, watching for a moment. A man can tell a lot by whether someone greets him at the door. No one came. So I opened the gate myself and stepped inside. The chatter dimmed for a breath when people noticed me. A couple of cousins offered awkward half-smiles, then turned quickly back to their conversations. Sylvia passed by with a plate of deviled eggs, her eyes darting down, refusing to meet mine. The silence around me was louder than any words. It wrapped itself tight, pressing on my chest. I stood near the kitchen doorway, cane planted firm, scanning the room. Curtis's voice rang out from the living room, loud and full of smug confidence. "Older folks just can't keep up these days," he said, holding his drink high like it was a punchline. A few chuckles rippled, thin and nervous. My daughter gave a weak laugh, not looking at me, not daring to correct him. That cut deeper than his words. She didn't defend me. I stayed silent. Sometimes silence weighs more than shouting. I let it settle into the room until even the children quieted for a moment, sensing something grown-ups tried to hide. My hand tightened around the cane, but my feet remained planted. I would not let them push me to the edges like an old coat left hanging in a closet. So I walked slowly toward the back porch, each step steady, deliberate. The night air was cooler there, a relief after the heavy stairs inside. And that's when I noticed Curtis's leather briefcase resting beside the screen door, half open. The corner of a document peeked out. Even from a distance, the watermark and notary seal looked familiar. The property deed I had already locked away in my desk drawer. This was another copy. My chest tightened, but not from fear, from clarity. They hadn't just stolen laughter. They were reaching for everything that held my name, my history, my life's work. I leaned on the porch railing, eyes fixed on that briefcase, and let the words slip out in a low whisper. They've gone too far. This silence ends soon. The silence in the living room felt heavier than the walls themselves. Stepping through the doorway with my cane in hand, I could feel every eye lock onto me. My daughter's face went pale. Curtis's jaw tightened, and the chatter that had filled the house a moment before drained into a thick, uneasy hush. I didn't ask permission. I didn't apologize for coming. Instead, I walked slowly, the weight of years and betrayal carried in every step, until I found a chair by the table. I pulled it out, lowered myself into it, and folded my hands across my cane. Not a word, not a nod, just the sound of wood scraping the floor as I claimed a place they hadn't offered. Curtis was the first to speak, his voice dripping with mockery. Look who decided to join us. Thought you'd be too tired to make the trip, old man. A few cousins let out nervous chuckles. Darlene didn't laugh, but she didn't stop him either. She looked at the table, fiddling with a napkin, as if silence would somehow absolve her of guilt. I let the insult hang in the air. Then I leaned back slightly and said, "Tired. I've lived through things that would make you crawl. Don't mistake age for weakness." The room shifted. Chairs squeaked. Drinks were set down. For the first time, Curtis's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He recovered quickly, puffing his chest. "You don't belong here, Marlon. You wouldn't understand what's best for this family anymore." My hand tightened around the cane, not in anger, but in control. Slowly. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. My hand didn't shake as I laid it on the table in front of him. "This," I said evenly, "is my house, my wife's name, and my signature. Except this one isn't mine." The room froze. Even the youngest children quieted, sensing something had broken. Curtis tried to laugh, the sound hollow. "That's ridiculous. You're imagining things. Must be your memory slipping." But then a small, innocent voice cut through the room. Elsie, my granddaughter, stood near the kitchen doorway with wide eyes. "Daddy, I saw you practice that paper at the kitchen table." The world seemed to stop. Every head turned toward her. Darlene's face drained of color. Curtis snapped, "Elsie, enough!" His voice cracked, panic seeping through. But the truth had already been spoken, and nothing could unmake it. Gasps spread around the room. A couple of relatives whispered, eyes darting between me and Curtis. Sylvia Trent shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her silence now a guilty cloak. I leaned forward, my voice like steel dragged across stone. "Out of the mouths of children comes the truth we try hardest to bury. You thought you could erase me with a pen, Curtis. You thought you could turn family into something you control, but you forgot one thing. Lies don't hold up when the smallest voice dares to speak." Curtis's face twisted with anger. He slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the silverware. "You're twisting a child's words." The sound echoed through the house, but I didn't flinch. My eyes stayed locked on his, unblinking. Then, slowly, I said, "No, it's you who twisted family into a lie. And tonight, it ends." The air inside that house was thicker than smoke. No one dared move at first, as though even the clink of a fork might split the room in two. I sat where I was, cane resting against my leg, eyes fixed on the papers lying in plain view on the table. Curtis's laughter had gone silent. Instead, there was only the shuffle of feet and the uneasy hum of people whispering to each other in half-sentences. It wasn't the shouting that hurt most. It was the silence, that heavy, damning silence. The same silence they'd once used to erase me from their gatherings, their stories, their laughter. Only now, it pressed harder than ever, like a weight on my chest. Darlene finally broke. Her chair scraped against the floor, and tears came fast, hotter than her words. "Daddy, please, She choked, her hands trembling against her lap. I didn't want this." I turned to her. My voice steady but raw. You knew. Her sob caught in her throat. I tried to stop it. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. You didn't try. You let him. You watched, and all those years of silence. I thought maybe you were protecting peace. But now I see. You were protecting him. Curtis's face hardened, jaw tight as he glared at her. Don't pin this on me, he snapped. But the room was shifting under his feet. Sylvia Trent kept her gaze down at her plate, her silence loud as thunder. I thought of all the times she'd smiled politely at me on the porch, never saying a word about what she knew. Complicity didn't always come with words. It often came with lips pressed shut. Then Leonard and Marjorie rose from their seats like prosecutors in a courtroom. Leonard jabbed a finger in my direction. You're too old to handle affairs, Marlon. Their words burned, but I didn't let them see me flinch. Marjorie added, You can't expect to hold on to everything forever. Families move forward. I looked around the room, faces divided, some tight with shame, others emboldened by cruelty. The dinner table where laughter had once echoed now looked like a trial bench. Every dish of food untouched, every glass of wine soured by truth. I stood slowly, not with rage, but with purpose. My cane steadied me, though my voice was firm enough on its own. I won't fight you here, not tonight. Keep your food, keep your laughter. But remember, truth has a way of finding its voice, even when you bury it. I turned for the door. Behind me, Elsie's small voice called. Grandpa. Feet scurried, but Darlene caught her, whispering sharp, desperate words. I didn't need to hear them. The sound of my granddaughter being pulled back said enough. The night air outside met me like an old friend, cool against the heat burning in my chest. I paused on the porch, gripping the cane, staring at the stars barely visible over the Asheville hills. A whisper left my lips, half prayer, half farewell. If truth divides us, then maybe we were never whole. The phone in my pocket buzzed, breaking the quiet. I answered, and Harlan Dorsey's gravelly voice came through, steady and sure. Marlon, I think it's time you and I took this to court. I closed my eyes, the weight of years heavy on my shoulders, but a new resolve forming beneath it. Harlan's late-night words echoed long after the line went dead. Court. He said it as if it were as natural as breathing, as if dragging my own blood into a courtroom were just another chore on a Tuesday morning. Sleep never came. Instead, I sat in my chair, Evelyn's picture frame glowing faintly in the lamplight, her eyes steady as if waiting for me to decide. Don't let them erase you, her voice whispered from memory. I could almost hear her say it, like she had on the hard days when bills piled up and shifts ran late. She'd always been the one to remind me that a man's dignity wasn't negotiable. Now, even in death, she still spoke louder than the family that had turned against me. By morning, word had spread faster than I could pour my first cup of coffee. Curtis was already spinning his story to anyone who'd listen. At the hardware store, a neighbor I'd known for 30 years barely looked me in the eye. On the sidewalk, another crossed the street rather than pass me. Senile, that was the word Curtis had chosen. A poison that slipped easy into ears, already curious about why a 78-year-old man might be at war with his own daughter. I wanted to spit. Instead, I sat on my porch, cane across my knees, watching the town I'd helped build look at me like a stranger. And then Harlan came. He didn't knock, didn't ask, just dropped his briefcase onto my table and said, We're not here to win popularity, Marlon. We're here to win the truth. For the first time in days, I let out a laugh, not joy, but relief. Harlan's loyalty was a steadying weight, the kind a man leans on when the world grows crooked. That evening, a soft knock at my back door startled me. It was Elsie, her small frame half hidden by the dusk. She slipped inside, eyes wide with both fear and determination. From her backpack, she pulled a folder, edges bent from being tucked away. I copied these from Daddy's office, she whispered. I think they're important. Hands trembling, I opened the folder. Bank transfers, ledgers, Names I didn't recognize. Each page was a nail in the coffin Curtis was building around me. My throat tightened. Elsie, sweetheart, you could get in trouble. Her eyes lifted to mine, fierce despite the tears shining in them. Grandpa, if I don't stand with you, then who will? The weight of those words nearly broke me. She was just a child. Yet she carried a courage the grown-ups in her house had long abandoned. I pulled her into my arms, promising silently that whatever happened, I'd protect her part in this. The following day, Harlan and I walked into the county clerk's office. The floor creaked under my cane, every step heavier than the last. Filing that petition felt like tearing the last shred of fabric holding our family together. But when the clerk stamped it, official and final, I knew there was no going back. When the notice reached Darlene's house, her voice cracked the air like a whip. How could you? Daddy, you're tearing this family apart. Her words stung deeper than any cut, but beneath the pain was clarity. Family had already been torn apart. The moment lies replaced love. That night, back home, I sat in the dark with Evelyn's picture in my hand. I never thought my fight for dignity would end up in court, I whispered. The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time, it didn't scare me. The crunch of footsteps in the yard broke the moment. I turned, heart pounding, as Curtis's shadow filled the window. His voice bellowed into the night, sharp and venomous. You'll regret dragging me into this, old man. I didn't move, didn't flinch, because his threats only confirmed what I already knew. The fight had just begun. The courthouse steps were taller than they looked from the bottom. Each one felt like a small mountain, and the echo of my cane against the stone reminded me with every tap that time had thinned my body but not my resolve. Harlan walked beside me, his steady presence quiet but powerful. Folks lingered outside, whispering as I climbed. Some nodded with sympathy. Others shook their heads as if I had committed the greater sin by bringing my family into the open. The words cut, but not as deep as what Darlene and Curtis had done. I held my head high. A man doesn't reach 78 years without learning that shame doesn't come from standing up for truth. Shame comes from hiding when you know better. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polish. The clerk behind the desk looked at me with the same detached patience she must give to every weary soul who files a complaint. My hand trembled as I slid the folder across the counter, not from fear but from the weight of it all, decades of sacrifice for children who now wished to erase me. This petition is to contest fraudulent documents, Harlan said firmly, his notary voice returning for the first time in years. Curtis's voice broke the hum of the courthouse, loud, arrogant, burning. This is ridiculous. He's an old fool, manipulated by bitter old men who can't stand losing control. His finger jabbed toward me, his face red with fury. The clerk raised a brow. Sir, you're close to contempt. Keep your voice down. For a moment, Curtis's mask cracked. I saw the desperation beneath the bluster. Men who lie often get loud when the truth edges too close. When the papers were stamped, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had done what Evelyn would have urged, protecting what was ours. Heavier because it meant that whatever was left of our family bonds was being torn by my own hand. But it was Curtis who had forced this path, not me. As we stepped back into the daylight, Darlene was waiting near the columns, her face pale and streaked with tears. She hurried toward me, her hands clutching mine. Dad, please, don't do this. You'll destroy us, she whispered, her voice breaking. My throat tightened. I saw the little girl she once was, tugging at Evelyn's apron, asking for another slice of pie. For a fleeting second, I wanted to believe her tears, but years of silence came rushing back. Silence at the picnic, silence when Curtis mocked me, silence while my home and my name were being stolen piece by piece. I answered slowly, each word anchored in truth. No, Darlene, greed already did. She flinched as if the word struck her, but she didn't let go of my hands. Her tears fell harder, yet I could no longer tell if they were for me or for the life she feared losing with Curtis. Finally, she pulled away, covering her face as she turned back toward him. The walk back to my truck was long, but a small figure darted from the shadows and stopped me. Elsie. She pressed a folded slip of paper into my palm, her eyes wide with quiet urgency. "Grandpa," she whispered. "I believe you." It was nothing more than a child's note, written in uneven letters with a crayon, but it carried more strength than the stamped petition in my hand. My heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. She should never have been caught in this storm, yet here she was, standing taller in spirit than most adults in that building. Behind her, Sylvia crossed the steps quickly, avoiding my eyes. Her silence was louder than Curtis's shouts. Silence is a choice, and she had chosen the side of convenience. That cut deep. That evening, the house felt different. Filing the petition had shifted something in me. I wasn't just a man clinging to memories. I was a man standing for them. I placed Elsie's note beside Evelyn's photograph on the mantel. The childish scrawl leaned against her smiling face. Two voices of love spanning generations, reminding me why I was fighting. As the sun slid below the hills, the mailman came by. Among the circulars and bills was a heavy envelope marked in bold letters. Confidential, hearing date set. I sat at the table, the house silent except for the ticking of the old clock, and whispered, "So, it's official. The fight for my dignity has a date." The courtroom was as still as a church. You could hear the shuffle of papers, the cough of a clerk, and the uneven breaths of those who came to see the end of this bitter fight. Curtis sat rigid, jaw tight, eyes like knives. Darlene clutched her purse so hard the leather squeaked. My cane tapped once against the polished floor as I steadied myself. At 78, standing tall was more than posture. It was proof that I was still here, unbroken. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a bell, calm, deliberate, final. He read the findings with steady weight. The deed Curtis paraded around was fraudulent. My signature had been forged. The will Evelyn and I had written together all those years ago remained valid. The property, the home, the small holdings, they remained in my name. Gasps echoed in the gallery. Some faces looked at me with quiet respect, others with discomfort at being witnesses to family shame. I didn't need their pity. What I needed was exactly what the judge had just given me. The truth affirmed. For a moment, I felt Evelyn close again, as if her voice brushed against my ear. "You stood tall. Marlon, you didn't let them erase us." Curtis shot up, his face red, fists balled. "This is a sham." His voice cracked into rage as officers stepped forward. He tried to shake them off, shouting curses that only confirmed everything the court had just ruled. Darlene, at his side, began to sob. Not gentle tears, but raw, choking cries that filled the air with a weight heavier than the gavel itself. Sylvia, my cousin, sat 2 rows back. She lowered her head, not once daring to meet my eyes. Her silence, which had once seemed harmless, now stood out like another betrayal. She had known, she had watched, and she had chosen comfort over truth. I didn't feel victory in that moment. I felt the sharp ache of loss of years, of trust, of the family I once believed in. Justice, I realized, doesn't mend broken branches. It only marks which ones snapped under the weight of greed. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the spring air felt cleaner, freer. The sky stretched wide, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed without heaviness in my chest. Then small arms wrapped around me. "Grandpa." Elsie's voice broke through everything else. She pressed her face into my coat, her little frame trembling. "You still have me." Those words undid me more than any judgment. I held her tight, patting her back, the warmth of her hug melting years of cold silence. That was my true inheritance. Not property deeds, not rulings, but love that had survived the storm. Harlan, my old friend, gripped my hand firmly. "You carried yourself like a soldier. Marlon, Evelyn would be proud." I nodded, my throat thick. "Couldn't have done it without you." That evening, I returned home. The house, once heavy with ghosts, felt lighter. On the mantel, I placed 2 things beside Evelyn's photo, the official court ruling and Elsie's note. the one where she had written in her careful child's hand. "Grandpa, I believe you." I sat for a long time, looking at that arrangement. Justice doesn't heal every wound, but it shields dignity. And dignity, once defended, becomes a lesson for those who come after us. Speaking aloud, though no one was there, I said what I wanted every older soul watching to know. If you stay silent, they'll write your ending for you. But if you stand, even at 78, your voice can still echo louder than lies. As the sun began to set, I eased myself onto the porch. Elsie's laughter carried from the yard, her sneakers scuffing the grass, her joy untainted by the ugliness she had witnessed. I leaned the cane against the rail, folded my hands, and let the fading light bathe the house Evelyn and I had built. "They thought they buried me in silence," I murmured, more to Evelyn than to myself. But I was only planting seeds for the truth, and with that, I knew the story had found its ending, not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in dignity reclaimed, and in the certainty that the youngest among us had seen what courage looked like, even when it came late in life.